Hilchos Shegagos Perek Shvi. Hamishtachva l'Avodah Zarah v'nisach, he was menasach yayin, or v'kiter, he was makter on the mizbeach to Avodah Zarah, or v'zibach, he did a shchita behela machas. So the din is chayiv arba chatois. Now by Avodah Zarah we learned that these four Avedas of mishtachve, menasach, makter, and shechting, you're chayiv for each Avodah Zarah. For each, any Avodah Zarah, regardless if that's the derech la'avdei or not, then you're chayiv for doing these Avedas. Masha'inkin doing other Avedas, so it's only if it's the derech. So al derech ha'pir atzmi le'pe'er, or zeirik evan l'markula. So if he did it to that Avodah Zarah, so then he's chayiv. If we, for example, be pir atzmi l'markula, or zeirik evan le'pe'er, so then he wouldn't be chayiv. So that's the case of these Avedas. The Maisa is that all these Avedas, be'emes is one lav. There's the lav of leisa avdim. So leisa avdim includes all types of Aveda. However, since there's an extra pasuk that says leishishtachvelam, so memela we learn now that you're chayiv on each Aveda separately. That's this chiddush by Avodah Zarah. Thatamishtachvel Avodah Zarah and v'nisach and v'kiter v'zibach v'helamachas, even though they're all nicholol in one lav, nevertheless it's chayiv arba chatois. We learn that from a special pasuk. V'chein and pir atzmi lepeir and v'zorak evam l'markulas, which are also part of the same lav. The helamachas is you're chayiv shtayim, because two separate avedas. V'chein kol ki eitz baza is yichayiv al kol aveda v'aveda. Aber b'medvar mamurim. When is this din that by Avodah Zarah there's a special din that even though be'emes they're all forms of aveda, but nevertheless you're chayiv for each aveda separately? That's only k'shehezed b'Avodah Zarah v'shogeg b'avedas elu. He knows that there's a issue of Avodah Zarah. He knows this is Avodah Zarah. He just doesn't know that these Avedas are called an Avodah Zarah. So then, so this be'emes, there's like different shegagos, because he knows there's a issa Avodah Zarah. Each one, he doesn't know that this is an Aveda. Avalim hezid b'avedas elu. He knows that these Avedas are Avodah Zarah. That wasn't the problem. However, v'shogeg b'avedas Zarah, he didn't realize that it's an Avodah Zarah. So then, eini chayiv elachat asachas. So it depends how many shegagos there were. If there was, this is a special din by Avodah Zarah. If there was one shgaga, there was the shgaga was that he didn't know that this was an Avodah Zarah. So therefore, even though he did many Avedas, he only chayiv one. Masha'inkin, if there were many shgagas, he knew that it was Avodah Zarah. He just didn't realize that this type of an Aveda is asur. So then he's chayiv for each one. Kesed Yoda shezu Avodah Zarah and v'sha'asur lo'avda. Avalei Yoda she'ishtachavoya v'anisach is Aveda, and then the ishtachva v'nisach. So then it's chayiv shtayim, because there were two shgagas. How this again we learn from Sukkim. Yoda she'elu Avedas. He knew that these were Avedas. V'asur lavid bem l'kil acher. Aber v'liyoda shezu Avodah Zarah l'fi shahis shel kesav v'zov. V'al al daite she'inkrui Avodah Zarah el shekesav v'zov. So that was his mistake. It was one mistake that caused all these Avedas to happen. And v'avda b'chol Avedas. So then the din is eini chayiv elachat asachas. And again, this is a special din by Avodah Zarah. The pasuk l'moshel, if a person ate chelev. So a person ate chelev, either he doesn't know that there's an isur chelev, or he doesn't know that this is chelev. So he doesn't know this is chelev, he doesn't know that is chelev. So over there is also shaychas two shgagas, but nevertheless, if it's the same avera and he did it twice, he's only chayiv one, even though there were two shgagas. Mashenkan by Avodah Zarah, there's a special limud that if there were many shgagas, there's a special limud that there's a chiyuv for each one, and that limud that there's a chiyuv for each one is only in case that there was taka two shgagas. Mashenkan of all the Avedas came as a result of one shgaga, so then the din is that you only chayiv one. Halacha beis. Klal godel amru b'Shabbos. Now by Shabbos there's a special rule which we learn out of Psukim. Again, it's not the pshat, because it's poshut that if there were many shgagas, then you chayiv many, and then if there's one shgaga, there you chayiv only one. There's special limudim b'negei Shabbos. By Shabbos there could be a person who's over on Shabbos, could be in one of three ways. It could be either he b'chalal doesn't know there's a concept called Shabbos. He doesn't know shachach ikar Shabbos. He b'chalal doesn't know there's a concept called Shabbos. Or there could be a mitzvah that he doesn't know today is Shabbos. Or there could be a mitzvah that he knows that today is Shabbos. He just doesn't know that this malach is a malach asur. So this is the rule. Klal godel amru b'Shabbos. Kol ashecheach ikar Shabbos. V'shachach shenetztavu Yisrael al Shabbos. He forgot b'chalal that there's a musa called Shabbos. There could be another case they didn't forget. Shenishba v'hu kotten lebein hakum. Ein is gayer kotten v'hu bein hakum. So in Mele, he never knew about Shabbos. He never knew about Shabbos. There's aval pi she'asa malach is harbe, b'Shabbos is harbe. So nevertheless, in Yechayev Elachatas Achas, because Sha'akel Shgoga Achasi, they're all included in one Shgoga, and he didn't know it was Shabbos. They say, Melis, he's only Chayev one Chatas. V'chein, Chayev Chatas Achas al Kol Chelev Shachal, because again, it's only one Shgoga. There was no Yediyah B'intayim. V'chatas Achas al Dam Shachal. V'chein Kol Kietze B'zeh, B'avedes Elu, B'avedes Elu. Any similar Avedas, all these Avedas, he's only Chayev one for all of them that he did. That's if he's Shachach Iker Shabbos. Now, V'chol HaYidei Iker Shabbos, someone that was Yidei Iker Shabbos, Avol Shachach Shayim Shabbos, V'dima Shehu Chel, is Avol Pisha Osa Bei Malachas Harbe, is Chayev Chatas Achas Alayim Kulei. So then you're Chayev for the entire Shabbos. V'chein Chatas Al Kol Shabbos V'Shabbos Sheshogabei. So if he forgot that today is Shabbos, so therefore he's Chayev for each Shabbos. Kol Shabbos V'Shabbos Sheshogabei. So he's Chayev, even though he had no recollection in the middle. Maybe he forgot B'chalal. He knew that there's a musig of Shabbos, and let's say he made a mistake. And by him, Shabbos became Sunday. Sunday was Shabbos. So he made a mistake each Shabbos. So Be'etzem, L'churi, he made one mistake. But nevertheless, each Shabbos is considered a separate forgetting. We'll learn later, there's a din Yom Shemitayim Havi Yidiyah L'chalek, and therefore each Shabbos is considered a separate shegeg. However, V'chol HaYidei Shayim Shabbos, V'chshogeg B'malachas, V'liyodeh Shemalachas Elu Asuris, Eshiyodeh Shein Asuris, aber V'liyodeh Shechayavn Aleim Koras, and V'also Malachas Harbe. So then Chayev Chatas Al Kol Av Malacha Malacha. Then he's Chayev for each Malacha. Afilo also Harboim Choser Achas Behelum Echad. Is nevertheless is maybe Shleishim V'Teish Chatois. So again, so there could be three Eifan. There could be an Eifan that is Shachach Iker Shabbos. So he brings one Chatas for all the Shabboses. Shachach Shayim Shabbos. So then he brings a Chatas for each Shabbos. And if he was Shachach the Malachas, so then he brings a Chatas for each Malachas. Even though they're all Nichlal in the Lav of Lisasakal Malacha, we have specially Mudim to learn that each Malacha is considered a separate Lav, considered like as if it's a separate Lav, and therefore Yechayev Al Kol Malacha Malacha. In the Pashtus, that even if you did Shachat L'moshel in a certain Malacha that is Asur, and he did it in one Shabbos and another Shabbos, he's only Chayev one for the Malacha, because Lepil was a Helam Echad. He didn't know that this Malacha is Asur, and Memele, even though he did it in separate Shabboses, nevertheless he's only Chayev one for this Malacha, even though he did it in separate Shabboses. Halacha Dalet. Now Shachach Shehayim Shabbos, and also V'Shachach V'Shogeg Av B'Malachas, and V'Liyodeh Shamalachas Elu Asuras. So he doesn't know that today is Shabbos, and also he doesn't know that these Malachas are Asuras. So then, since Lepel he forgot that today is Shabbos, so the fact that he forgot that the Malachas are Asuras aren't really relevant, because Lepel he could have done it anyways, because he doesn't know today is Shabbos. So then the din is Ein Chayev Elachatas Achas. Now the Rambam says a case where a person he forgot all Lamates Malachas, and therefore he's Chayev Al Kol Malacha Malacha. The question is, if we're saying he knows today is Shabbos, but he forgot about all the Lamates Malachas. The question is, the Yodel Shabbos B'mai. So how does he know? What does it mean he knows today is Shabbos? If he forgot about all Lamates Malachas. So B'emes over here, you'd be able to say he forgot. He made a shegeg on all the Lamates Malachas. He didn't realize that it's a Chi of Karas. He only thought there was a Chi of Lav, and therefore that's also called a shegeg. In other words, if he was Shagala B'Karas, so that's considered a shegeg. But the Rambam in Hilchas Shabbos writes clearly that he didn't know all Lamates Malachas. He B'chal didn't know about the Lamates Malachas. So on that, the answer is that he knew, let's say he knew Tchumen, he knew the Isur Tchumen. See, it's not one of the Lamates Malachas, it's an Isur Lav. According to the Rambam, there's a Isur Tchumen Midiraisa. He knows today is Shabbos. He knows that there is an Isur of Shabbos today. He just doesn't know that these Lamates Malachas. There's also a Musig, he knows that it's Kiddush. That's also an issue, whether that would be enough of Yodel or Shabbos, because Kiddush is a Chiyuv Minatera in Shabbos. But I'll call upon him, so we have this din, that when a person, if he forgets Bechlal the Musig of Shabbos, he's only Chayiv one. If he forgets today is Shabbos, he's Mechuyev for each Shabbos. And if he forgets the Malachas, so then he's Mechuyev for each Malacha. Now the Rambam also mentioned that we're talking about a Tinik, Shenishber Ben Akum. So first there is an ishtical issue, B'Negeya, the Rambam mentions a cotton, someone that was an Nizgayer cotton Vu Ben Akum. Question is, when a person was Nizgayer cotton and he never knew about anything, does he really have a din of a Yid Min HaTeira? Tesis and Ksubas Daf Yudalev says that it's only a din d'Rabbanan, that his Geirus is only a d'Rabbanan dika level. So then how could he be bringing a carbon for that level of Geirus? That's also ha'ara here in Rambam. And then there's another ha'ara. We learned that Lamashal, when a person, let's say, was Baal Anida, or any Arayas, so over there's a musik called Gufin Mukhalakim. There's Yediyas Machalkis and there's Gufin Mukhalakim. So even though there was one, it was one Helam, it was Behelam Achas, but since it's Gufin Mukhalakim, so Yechayiv, I'll call Guf v'Guf. Now the Rambam doesn't say on all the Arayas. The Rambam just says, I'll call Chaylev Sha'achal and Al Dam Sha'achal. Now over there, Bechlal, there's no musik of Tamkin and Machalkin. It's all one thing. So Memela, it's really L'churi, you have to understand what's the Chiddush. L'churi was Behelam Achas, so Memela, he's Chayiv one. The Chiddush is that he's Chayiv, even though he never knew about it. But the musik that he's only Chayiv one, L'churi is not a Chiddush. But on the other hand, the Rambam doesn't write, what would be B'negei Arayas if he was Baal HaArayas, and there was Gufin Mukhalakim, would he also be only Chayiv one? There's no mention of that in the Rambam here. Halacha Hei. Ha'oisa Av v'tuldeisa Behelam Achas. So in Shabbos there's Avis and there's Tuldas. He does the Av and its Tuldas Behelam Achas. So the din is Eini Chayiv Elachatas Achas, because it's considered he did the same Aveira twice. In other words, if he did different Avis, so that's a Chidush, even though all the Avis are Nichel, Lisasakol Malacha, but nevertheless it's considered, especially Mudim, to teach us that you're Chayiv, that's Chilik Malachas, that the Chilik Malachas L'Shabbos, that you're Chayiv Al Kol Malacha Malacha. Mashenkin, if you do the Av and the Tulda, so then you only Chayiv one. And then the Rambam is, Ve'ein Tzorich Leimar, Ha'esa Tuldis Harbi Shal Av Echot, She'ini Chayiv Elachatas Achas. So the Rambam is saying, Av Tuldeisa is Eini Chayiv Elachas. And if he does just the Tuldis, so that's Ve'ein Tzorich Leimar. So there's a deal in the Achreinim, what's this Ve'ein Tzorich Leimar? It's the same halacha. You know, since they're all part of the same type of malacha, either it's the Av Tuldeisa or the Tuldis, so then we only chayiv chatas achas. Soon we'll see maybe behemshach. Then the Ram says Allah chavav also tulda shel av zeh, the tulda shel av zeh behelam achas. So on here the Ram says yiroli shu chayiv shnei chatois. So it's like a chiddush. The Ram's saying it's posher that if a person does two avis, he's chayiv two chatois. Now what happens if he does two tuldas? L'chura, each tulda is al derav v'diyav. A tulda is the same like the Av. It's a tulda of the Av. The Rambam seems to be saying that there would be a svara to think that the tuldas are like a new institution called tuldas, and all the tuldas have one din. So even if you do a tulda of one Av and a tulda of another Av, there would be a svara to think that maybe you only chayiv one. And therefore the Rambam is saying, no, you're that if you do a tulda of one Av and you do a tulda of another Av, so then you're chayiv two. So once we establish that there's even a svara that two tuldas of two of us should be chayiv one, so maybe it's understandable that if there's two tuldas of the same Av, is then for sure you only chayiv one. And therefore that's understandable. Once we see this Yiroli and halacha vav, so then we could understand the ve'in tzorich leimer of halacha hei b'pashtus. Agam, it's both of them are chidushim. That side this Yiroli, that it's only a Yiroli that is chayiv shnei tuldas, and also that it's ve'in tzorich leimer. Halacha zayin. Also malachas harbe me'im malacha achas. So there's a musik of an Av and a Tulda, and then there's a musik called an Av, which is malachas harbe me'im malacha achas. So a Tulda means it's not mamish the Av. L'mashal, you have toichen. Toichen is grinding. So when you grind, let's say you take something wheat and you make it into flour, and then you cut, let's say, that's an example of Magen Mishnah gives of a Tulda, that you cut the Yirok is dak. So it's not mamish flour. It's not the same like taking a kernel, making it into flour, which mamish became powdery. Over here you cut a dak. So it's a tulda of the Av. It's a tulda of the Av. It's not mamish the Av, it's a tulda of the Av. Masha'inkin, there could be a mitzvah, so let's see, Zereya and Nuteya. Zereya and Nuteya is not this, one is an Av and one is a tulda. Or Mevashel and Oifa. It's not one is an Av and one is a tulda. They're both, Avis is just, this is Be'ilonis and this is Bezroim. So also malachas harbe me'ein malacha achas. Person did malachas harbe, but they were all part of the same Av, and they were all Avis. Kegoin shezora, and the hivrich, and the hirkiv. So the hirkiv means he grafted, and hivrich means he pulled the vine under the ground, and memela he pulls it out on another place, and memela it grows from the other side. Because you take a vine or something part of the tree, and you put part of it under the ground, and then it grows out from another side from the ground. So he planted it, or the hivrich, and the hirkiv means he grafted it, and it was all done behelamachas. So eine chayiv lechatas achas. It's chayiv only one chatas because he did. It's like repeating the same av 3 times, just like if it would be zara 3 times, one after the other. So since it was behelamachas, he's only chayiv 1. So al derech zeh, if he does malachas harbin mein malacha achas, he's also only chayiv 1. Kfarnas bar bilchus Shabbos, so avos v'atuldas. What are the avos and what are the tuldas, and also what are the hamalachas shemein avos? Which malachas would be considered not a tulda of the av, but rather they would be considered mein avos. Halacha ches. Now also malachas harbe mein malacha achas b'Shabbos is harbe. Person went ahead. Now earlier we learned that if a person does the Shegagos malachas, he's chayav al kol malacha malacha. In the Pashtus Advarim, this is a chiddush over here. The Pashtus Advarim is that for the malacha that he did, that he's chayav on kol malacha by Shegagos malachas, is even if he did this malacha b'kama Shabbos. If he did this malacha b'kama Shabbos, he's still chayav only one, because the whole shgaga was only a Shegagos malachas, and the fact that it was done in different Shabbos doesn't make a difference, because it's still one elam l'gabi the malacha. Here the Rambam is going to say a chiddush. This is the way that Evan Ozel learns pshat, that it's a dvar chiddush, that if you do malachas harbe, me'ein malacha achas, so be'etzem it's like you did the same malacha many times. But nevertheless, there's a difference. If you did it in the same Shabbos, you take only chayav 1. Also malachas harbe, me'ein malacha achas, you chayav only 1, like he said in halacha zayin. But if you did malachas harbe, me'ein malacha achas in different Shabboses, so then you're chayav on each malacha. Even though l'chure, what's the difference if it was done many Shabboses? If we're saying that if you do the same malacha in many Shabboses, you only chayav 1, and since the malacha is harbe, mein malacha achas is l'chure like repeating the same malacha, so l'chure should also be chayav 1. That's the psachidish over here. That's the pashtus haloshen. Not everybody agrees to this pshat, but that's l'chure the pashtus advarim. Ram says as a osa malacha is harbe, mein malacha achas b'Shabbos is harbe. Whether bein bezodn Shabbos v'Shegagos malachas, or bein b'Shegagos Shabbos v'zodn malachas, so either way, he's chayav al kol malacha. Now, if it was b'Shegagos Shabbos v'zodn malachas, so of course he's chayav al kol malacha. That din is even if he does the same malacha in 3 separate Shabboses, and it was b'Shegagos Shabbos v'zodn malachas, so he's also chayav al kol malacha. That's not a chiddush of asa malachas harbe me'ein malacha achas. Over here, the chiddush is that even if it was b'Shegagos malachas, b'zodn Shabbos v'Shegagos malachas, so he's still chayav al kol Shabbos v'Shabbos. Lochamal. Asa malachas harbe. Me'ein malacha achas b'Shabbos is harbe. Bein b'zodn Shabbos v'Shegagos malachas. Bein b'Shegagos Shabbos v'zodn malachas. So either way is chayav al kol malacha. Ketzad. Yoda shayim Shabbos. And v'zorabei. Why? Ibnei shli yoda shazriya malacha. V'chein b'Shabbos shniya, yoda shu Shabbos, and v'nota bo. He planted one, p'nei shel yoda shanatiyah asura b'shum malacha. V'chein b'Shabbos shlishis is hivrich. Why? P'nei shel yoda shavracha malacha. So over here is chayav al kol achas v'achas. He's chayav on each one, even though this was a Shegagos malachas. It was a Shegagos malachas. It wasn't a Shegagos Shabbos. But since we're dealing with, he didn't do the same malacha. He did malachas me'ein malacha achas. So be'emes it was 3 shgagos. So if it would have been done on the same Shabbos, he would have been only chayav achas. The Rambam said that clearly in halacha zayin. But since he's doing it on 3 Shabboses and it was 3 shgagos, so then he's chayav al kol achas v'achas. Afal pi shehein malacha achas. So here the Rambam says, "Mepnei Shabboses ki gufen muchalakim," because Shabboses have a din of gufen muchalakim. We'll get back to these words in a minute. Then on halacha tes, shachach shahayim Shabbos v'zorabei v'yedei shazri malacha v'chein b'Shabbos shniya shachach שהוא שבס, ונוטה בו, והוא יודע שהנטייה מלאכה, וכן בשלישי שוכח שהוא שבס, and והיברך, אף על פי שידע הברכה מלאכה, so then the din is הרי זה חייב על כל אחס ואחס. Why? שהיומים שבין שבס לשבס, הרי הם כי ידיע אחס לחלק. Now in Halacha Tes, he also says that it's talking about it, that in the 3 Shabboses, one he did Zriya, the other one he did Natiya, and the one he did Avracha. But the Pashtus is that it's not Negeah. In Halacha Ches, it's Negeah that we're dealing with Malachis, which are Me'ein Malacha Achas, but it's not the same Malacha. Only then are you chayav al kol Shabbos v'Shabbos. Masha'inkin in Halacha Tes, where over there we're talking about that there was Shegag Shabbos, so even if he did Zriya on Shabbos 1 and Shabbos 2 and Shabbos 3, and Lepel, it came b'Shegag Shabbos, so he's Chayav al Kol Malacha, which is really what the Rambam said right away in the beginning of the Perek. The only reason why the Rambam says this is B'Parshus, because he's Gorer, the Lashon that he's talking about in Ches, he's talking about the same halacha, whereas if he did these 3 malachas, which are Me'ein Malacha Achas, and he did it in 3 Shabboses, whether he did it b'Shigas Malacha, or he did it b'Shegag Shabbos, either way, he's Chayav al Kol Shabbos v'Shabbos. Now, the Maisa is the Rambam, at the end of Halacha Ches, says Mepnei Shahashabbos ki gufen mucholokim, and at the end of Halacha Tes, the Rambam says Harein ki yediyah achas lechalik. Now they're 2 separate inyanim mamish, because the end of Halacha Tes is understandable. In other words, Shabbos is considered yediyah achas lechalik, which means he forgot one Shabbos, and then he forgot the next Shabbos, and then he forgot the 3rd Shabbos. So Memela, so the pastors were saying it's Keilu, he knew that it was Shabbos. He knew already, even though maybe he didn't know. But it's Keilu that since it's a separate Shabbos, and the one is the next Shabbos, and another Shabbos, it's considered a Yediyah Achas L'chalik, that it's a separate Shegig. Each one is a separate Shegig. The Yediyah Achas L'chalik, to make it 3 Shegigim. That's this din of Yediyah Achas L'chalik. It's a din of a Yediyah to make it into 3 Shegigim. But Negeya, Gufim Muchalakim is a different din. Gufim Muchalakim is not really considered 3 Shegigim. Over there, the Pshat is, a person doesn't know that a Nida is Asr. So it's 1 Shegig. Lepel, he was Baal Shtei Nidas. So the din, since it's Gufim Muchalakim, is Chayiv 2. So Negeya Halacha Ches, you have to understand the Havanas Advar. But Negeya Halacha Ches, over there, the Pshat, we're talking about, there was Shegagos Malachas. It's Shegagos Malachas, and it was also Shabbos Muchalakim. So since it was Shegagos Malachas and Shabbos Muchalakim, so on that you call it Kigufin Muchalakim. You look at each Shabbos as being a Guf Muchalak, Memela Yechayev on each Shabbos separately, even though Lepel you repeated Me'ein Malacha Achas. You're looking at each Shabbos separately. You're not looking at the Indian of Yediyah L'chalik. We're looking at each Shabbos separately as if it's a Gufin Muchalakim. Masha'en Ken, in the case where a person was Shegagos Shabbos, so over here the issue was Shegagos Shabbos. In the case of Halacha Ches, you can't say it's a Yediyah L'chalik, because the Shegig wasn't about whether it was Shabbos or not. The Yediyah L'chalik, the Yom Shemitayim is a Yediyah L'chalik, is only when the Shegig was about Shabbos. So then you could say there was a Yediyah L'chalik, Ki'ilu, he knew about the Shabbos, and now there was another Shegig about the next Shabbos. That's a type Yediyah L'chalik. Mashenkin in Halacha Ches, over there was no Shegig about the Shabbos. The Shegig was about the Malacha. So you really can't call it a Yediyah L'chalik. So therefore, you have to call it Kegufim Muchalakim. Each Shabbos is a Gufim Muchalakim. The Shaila is only, once we establish that each Shabbos is a Gufim Muchalakim, why do we need the din of Yediyah L'chalik? L'chura, once it's already a Gufim Muchalakim, so l'chura, what do we need this din of Yediyah L'chalik? Yediyah L'chalik is only in order to make it 2 Shegigim, but Lepel, it's already Gufim Muchalakim. That's already something Taka the Achreinim talk about. Halacha Yud. Mi shekotzar v'tochan K'groigris b'Shegagos Shabbos v'Zod Malachas. So since it was done b'Shegagos Shabbos v'Zod Malachas, it's considered one thing. So be'emes you would be chayiv only one for both of them. Kotzer v'tochan K'groigris b'Shegagos Shabbos v'Zod Malachas, you're chayiv one. Sheini chayiv v'lechat achas. And then v'chazar v'kotzer v'tochan K'groigris b'Zod Shabbos v'Shegagos Malachas. So in other words, now all of a sudden he realizes it's Shabbos. He forgot. Earlier, he didn't realize it was Shabbos, and he knew that the Malachas are Asa. Now he realizes that it's Shabbos, but on the other hand, he doesn't know the Malachas are Asa. And Lepel, he didn't realize in between that he did the Aveira. In other words, he was Kotzer V'Tochan in the morning, and that was B'Shegagos Shabbos V'Zod Malachas. In the afternoon, he was Kotzer V'Tochan. In the afternoon, he already knew it was Shabbos. He forgot that these Malachas are Asa, but he didn't realize that he did this Malacha in between. And for the afternoon, for the Shegagos Malachas, over there is Chayav al Kol Malacha. And now, the Noidoloi al Ktsira shel Shegagos Shabbos v'Zod Malachas. Now he reminded himself now that he was Kotzar with Shegagos Shabbos, the one that he did with Shegagos Shabbos v'Zod Malachas. That's all he reminded himself, and that's what he's bringing a carbon for. He's bringing a carbon for that Ktsira which he did with Shegagos Shabbos v'Zod Malachas. Now, since that we learned already that when a person brings a carbon on something which behela machas, he also did another aveira. So even though he wasn't aware of that aveira when he brought the carbon, but lepel, that Avera, which was done behelamachas, with this Avera that he's bringing a carbon for, is also niskaper. That's what we learned over there when he had the one kazayis of chaylev and another kazayis of chaylev behelam mishorishin, and then he had a third one. So I'll call upon him over here. He's bringing a chatas for the ktsira that he did with Shigga Shabbos. Nachmal v'neidale ktsira sheshigga Shabbos zod malachas. So the din is ktsira kireres ktsira. Since he's bringing it for the ktsira of Shigga Shabbos, and the ktsira of Shiggas malachas were done behelamachas because he didn't know that he was chata big time. It was all behelamachas. So when he's niskaper on the ktsira of Shigga Shabbos, he's also niskaper on the ktsira of Shiggas malachas. Now lepel, when he's niskaper on ktsira of Shigga Shabbos, he's also niskaper on the tchina of Shigga Shabbos, because the ktsira and the tchina of Shigga Shabbos were one. So in that kapara lies side the ktsira of Shigga Shabbos, inside the tchina of Shigga Shabbos. So mele we say ktsira gereres ktsira. The ktsira of Shigga Shabbos is greater with it. Also the ktsira of Shiggas malachas, utchina and the tchina of Shigga Shabbos, which is nischaper together with the ktsira of Shigga Shabbos, is also gereres tchina. So ktsira gereres tchina, utchina gereres tchina. Ukeilu osa arbata b'Shigga Shabbos zod malachas. And therefore, she'eni chayv al-chatas achas and lepel, he only brings one chatas. He brings one chatas for all four of them. The kiv and shehikr of chatasu, once he brings this chatas for the ktsira of Shigga Shabbos, for the ktsira of Shigga Shabbos, is chaper le'akel, with this principle of ktsira gereres ktsira and tchina gereres tchina. Again, since the ktsira and the tchina of Shigga Shabbos are connected, so each ktsira is greater with the ktsira is greater with it, the ktsira of Shiggas malachas, because it was behelamachas. He didn't know in the middle that he was chata, and al derech zeh the tchina is gereres tchina. That's talking about if he knew about the Shigga Shabbos. Aval im neidele tchila al ktsira shel zot Shabbos v'Shiggas malachas. He reminded himself he did all four. He did ktsira and tchina of Shigga Shabbos and Shigga Shabbos. And then he also did ktsira tchina of Shiggas malachas. And he reminded himself of the ktsira of the Shiggas malachas. Nachamal. Avol neidele tchila al ktsira shel zot Shabbos v'Shiggas malachas. And then the hikr of chatas, who is makriv the chatas for the ktsira of the Shiggas malachas. So niskapale al zuak ktsira shnei de'olah, that's pashut, that the ktsira which is nei de'olah is bringing a kapara, and also v'haktsira v'hatchina shel Shigga Shabbos v'zod malachas, and also the Shigga Shabbos and zod malachas, those because ktsira is gereres ktsira, the ktsira of the Shigga Shabbos, and since the ktsira of Shigga Shabbos together with the tchina of Shigga Shabbos are considered one package, so therefore once the ktsira of Shiggas malachas is greater the ktsira of Shigga Shabbos, it's memela also greater the tchina of Shigga Shabbos. So memela nachamal nischaper le'alzu ktsira shnei dola, and also v'ktsira v'tchina shel Shigga Shabbos zod malachas. Why? Because with shneim ki malacha achas they're considered one parsha, and therefore v'nigra ktsira utchira in maksira. So the ktsira and the tchina of Shigga Shabbos is nigra together with the ktsira of Shiggas malacha. But the tchina shel zdein Shabbos, the tchina of zod Shabbos remains until he knows about it, and v'yavi chatashniya, and then he'll bring a chatashniya. So as the other ones, he's becoming a schaper without knowing about it. Because if he would have been knowed about it before he brought the carbon, before he was mafresh the carbon, so he taka would have to bring a separate carbon as well. But over here, he brought the carbon, he didn't know about them, and they became the schaper. But the other one, the tchina of Shiggas malachas, didn't become the schaper. So memela, so when he finds out about the tchina of Shiggas malachas, so he has to bring a separate chatas for her. Now, kotzar kechatzi gregas b'Shigga Shabbos zod malachas. He didn't know that today was Shabbos, but he knew that there's a Isser of Tzir. And then he forgot. Then he realized that it's today's Shabbos, but he forgot about the Isser of Tzir. Now, v'chazar v'kotzer kechatzi gregas b'zdein Shabbos Shiggas malachas. And again, it's not talking about that he realized that he didn't have Erev bin time. Because if he would have realized that he didn't have Erev bin time, we learned before that Yesh Yediyah Chatzi Shir. So he wouldn't be able to bring a carbon. Masha'inkan over here, he did this with this shkaga, with the Shigga Shabbos and Zod Malachas, and the second half he did with the Shiggas Malachas and the Zod Shabbos. Is Harei Elam, it's start from Ktsira Gereres Ktsira. It's also the principle of Ktsira Gereres Ktsira. Whereas they're all considered one Inyan because this is Shigga Shabbos, even though this is Shigga Shabbos, Shiggas Malachas, they combine. the Ksira and the Ksira combined because there was no Yedias Hachet being Kayim. V'chein kol kiyetze b'zeh b'shar melachos. Halacha Yud Aleph. Hamischaven lachtiches hatolush. V'choteches hamechuber. He had intention of being choitech tolush. And lepel he ended up being choitech mechuber. Is afal pishin ischaven lechaticha. He wanted to cut. Aber heil v'lei osa machshavtei is potem and achatos. Why? Shezek misasik. V'lei osa reteira el meleches machshavas k'misha b'yarna come upon. So if a person was in ischaven lachtiches hatolush v'choteches hamechuber, so the churi could call him a shegig. He wanted to be choitech tolush and lepel was choitech hamechuber. So we're saying no, that doesn't go into the gather of shegig. That goes into a gather of masasik, and it's not a meleches machshavas. So a shegig means I know what I'm doing. It's just that he didn't realize this. Today Shabbos, he didn't realize that this malach is aser. But over here, he was trying to do one act, and he ended up doing another act. So that's not called shegig. That's called masasik, and that's meleches machshavas aser teira, and therefore he's not chayav achatas. Now the tzir the Rambam says over here is nischaven lachtich as atolish v'chotich semechuber. Earlier, the Rambam was speaking about a mischaven l'hagbiyas atolish v'chotach semechuber. So why over here the Rambam is speaking about lachtich as atolish v'chotach semechuber? Over there he was talking about l'hagbiyas atolish v'chotach semechuber. So the Rambam brings from Abnei Nezer that there's a difference. Over there was talking about the same item. In other words, he thought that this item was detached, and he wanted l'hagbiyas atolish, nischaven l'hagbiyas atolish. And lepel, he ended up pulling it out, and it wasn't really chotach as mechuber, but he was nischaven l'hagbiyas atolish, and he was magbiyah the mechuber, and maybe it ended up being choitachet mimkem gedule. He didn't want to be choitachet. Masha'inkin over here, we're talking about he did want to cut. He wanted to make a cut. He wasn't intending on picking up something that was tolish. He wanted to cut something. So if lepel, he wanted to cut something, and he thought it was tolish, and lepel was mechuber, so it wouldn't be a meleches machshavas, because he made a mistake. In other words, he didn't realize that this was an isser, but lepel, he did what he wanted to do. He wanted to cut it. He just didn't realize that this was considered an isser, which is not really so pashut. That's what he's saying, Pshat and Rambam. That in the case where a person knows what he's doing, he knows he's cutting it, but he's under the impression that the item is detached. And the item is detached, and lepel, it ended up being attached. So on such a case, he wouldn't be considered a misasik. Rather, he would be considered a shegig. So therefore, over here it's talking about his nischaven lachtich tolush zeh, and he was choitich tolush acher. In other words, he was nischaven lachtich this tolush, and lepel, he ended up being choitich something else which was mechuber. That's when he's a misasik. Nachabal. When a person's picking something up and he thinks it's tolush, so then if he has in mind to cut it, thinking that it's tolush, and it ends up being mechuber, so then that wouldn't be a masasik, that wouldn't be a chsarim meleches machshavas, because he cut what he wanted to cut. It's just that he was under the impression that it wasn't mechuber, and in reality it was mechuber. When would he be potter in such a case where he intended on cutting, and he ended up cutting mechuber? Only in a case where he intended cutting something which was taka tolush, and lepel, he ended up something which was taka mechuber, so he ended up doing what he didn't want to do. In the case where he thought this was tolush and it was reality mechuber, he did what he wanted to do. It's just that he didn't realize that it was mechuber, and that would be a shegig, says the Avnei Nezer Pshat and Rambam. So Meil comes out like this. There could be two cases of misasik. One case is he picked something up under the impression that it's a tolush, and lepel, it was mechuber, so he had no intention of cutting. He had intention of just picking up a tolush. That's a misasik. Now, if he would have had an intention of cutting something, which was really a mechuber, and he thought it was a tolush, then he wouldn't have been a misasik. But over here, he's a misasik because he had no intention of cutting, intention of picking something up. However, if a person has intention of cutting something, and he ends up cutting a mechuber, which means he intended on cutting A, which was taka tolush, and he ended up cutting B, which was taka mechuber, so then that's also misasik. So there's two separate siyurim of a misasik, as opposed to nischaven lachtich zeh v'choshach, that this was a tolush, or lepel, it ended up being a mechuber. Halacha Yud Beis, hachoyte gecholim b'Shabbos. Choyte gecholim means he's shoveling coals b'Shabbos, shu mechabes ol yenis, umadlikas atachtenis. So when a person shovels coals, so the coals that are on top become now on the bottom, the ones that are on the bottom are on top. Now generally the ones that are on top are ignited, they're lit, there's nothing smothering them. the ones that are on bottom are being smothered. So when the ones that are on top end up being on the bottom, so he's extinguishing them. The ones that are on the bottom end up being on the top, so he's igniting them. So hachete gecholim b'Shabbos, so which ends up being mechabes el yenis. The ones that were on top now are being extinguished. Umadlikas atachtenis, and the ones that are on the bottom are becoming ignited. So if that was his intent, that he wanted to extinguish some and ignite others, so then chayiv shtayim. Masha'inkin, if he didn't have that intent, so then he's not chayiv shtayim. That's the pashtus advar. That's halacha number 1. Then the Ram continues, choter gecholim l'scham neam. If he shovels coals in order to become warm, he wants to bring the coals to somewhere in order to warm himself up. And lepeil v'huveru me'aleim, so these coals became ignited as a result of the fact that he shoveled some. So Memela, the ones on the bottom obviously became extinguished, and the ones on the top became ignited. So the din is chayiv shtayim. Why? So notice it was a psik reisha. So there's no p'tur of eina mischaven. Elamai is eina tzricha legufa. He doesn't really need it to become extinguished. Nevertheless, amlacha she'eina tzricha legufa chayiv alah k'misha b'yarna b'hilchos Shabbos. That's it. So Memela, so in the first case over there, we're saying that when he's chayte gecholim b'Shabbos, it has to be mischaven lechabes ulahaver. So then you chayiv shtayim. Mashenkin in the second case, when he was chayte gecholim l'schama b'hem, so here the Rambam says bepshitus you chayiv shtayim. So the question is lechura, why should you? In the first case, why do you need? What's the difference? Why in the first case you need the l'schaven, and in the second case the Rambam doesn't say you need l'schaven? What's the havanas advarim? So on that they bring the pshat zozeh. In the first case, he's being chayte gecholim b'pashtus because he wants to create coals, and he needs taka extinguished coals. Over there, he's being chayte the coals in order to extinguish them. So therefore, he's definitely chayiv on mechaba. On mechaba. The question is only if he's also mechaba on maver. So now we say that since he has an intention of being mechaba, that's his intention of being mechaba, and lepeil, he's not interested in being maver. So maver is mekalkel really. Over here, it's not the shaila is eina mischaven. Over here, the maver is mekalkel because he's only interested in the mechaba. That would be the normal reason why a person was chayte gecholim. So therefore, over here, you need that he should have intent. If he has intent, so it's not a mekalkel. So the intent is not in order for him to be a mechaven or should be a malacha shetzricha legufa. Over here, the intent is in order for him not to be a mekalkel. So therefore, in the schaven lechabes lahaber is chayiv shtayim. Masha'inkin in the case of chayte gecholim l'scham mehem, over there was no intent of extinguishing. He was just bringing it in order to warm himself up. And the pashtus advarim, what's going to happen is that some of it will be extinguished and some of it will be ignited, and that'll happen. That's a psik reisha. And even though it's a malacha she'eina tzricha legufa, he doesn't need it to become extinguished. That's not really what he needs. Abul apels, that's what's happening, and that's psik reisha. So therefore, yechayev shtayim, yechayev alak, neshabiyana b'hilchos Shabbos. Shem shechayav nal zdeina koris is chayev al shegagos kar mechatas. Just like if you would be doing the mezid, it would be chayiv koris, because malach she'eina tzricha legufa is chayiv koris. So al derech zeh you chayiv chatas.